Okay. You go to the Evelkah, Cohesia connecting.
But today we have a really special, I don't want to say it's special, but an eye-opening discussion around fear and how we navigate fear, but also where does fear come from and how do we overcome fear? And I think in the current climate where there is talk around the cost of living and the different political changes, and then just life changes in general, there is a hesitancy and engagement with the unknown. And ultimately, that boils down to one's fear in that unknown or what's to come. So today, we're just going to explore that and talk all about fear.
When you were young, what was your biggest fear?
Snakes.
There are no snakes where we live around here. But were there snakes in Anguilla?
Yeah.
Okay.
Loads. Too many. There was one time my mom picked me up from school and we was on our way home, and as we pulled into the garage, there was a huge snake sitting on the doorstep. Sorry for any people that have phobias.
This is next level.
But it was there, and we were just like, what do we do? Call Dad.
Okay,
call someone.
Different levels. But I always ask people, like, what was your fear growing up? And sometimes those fears either was faced somehow or they still linger on. Like my mother, she's not going to listen to this podcast, so I feel a bit safe to say. It wasn't really a fear, but she didn't like cats. And the story behind it, it's not even my story, so please don't hold it against me. She said that, like, I think the cat, her neighbour's cat, something happened to the cat and it was injured. And she was the only one around to see it. So she buried the cat, and then she felt sick in her stomach, thinking like somehow she would be responsible for this cat.
Okay.
And she went back the next day, and this grave that she dug was empty, and the cat was no longer there. Since that day, she has had zero. Like, she's like, I just don't like cats. Which is why I asked the question, like, what, when you were growing up, what was like some of your biggest fears? And I love the fact that we get to a point where, like, I can't believe that used to scare me. Snakes, however, that could be a consistent issue.
Yeah, that stuck with me. I don't think I'll ever get over. I can watch them behind glass at a museum or a zoo or whatever, but I think it's not like we're going to go into this whole snake discussion, but it's the fact that they don't have legs and the way that they slither around. I'm just like, no.
They don't look very happy. They look pretty evil. So yeah. And this long-standing representation of evil through the image of the snake is kind of passed down for hundreds of years.
So I definitely think that. But then from a non-animal point of view, like heights, I was always afraid of heights as well.
How do you feel about heights now? We're not there. So we will not get Evelkah jumping off a tower bridge at any point.
I have tried to fight my fear in doing that. I've done like rock climbing, abseiling. I've done the big swing. I've jumped off stuff.
I mean, that's really facing it. I would not even do that.
And zip lining. I did treetop goe. That was really cool. I don't even know how I did it, but I managed to do it.
For those that don't know Evelkah, this is a very Evelkah thing to just get on and do it anyway. And I think, to be honest, this is probably testament to that. It explains a lot about you go for things like, I'm trembling inside, but I'm just going to do it anyway, is your approach. And that makes sense, actually, that you would do all those things.
Yeah, so I'm not saying I'm not going to go out there and keep doing it. I've done it.
You've done it.
But I think when we look at fear, we somehow kind of look at the things, the material things around us, like, animals or heights or water, swimming. Some people are afraid of swimming and things like that. But on a grand scheme of things, fear is also encompassing some of like our trauma from what we went through, like your mom's experience with the cat. And then from a wider perspective, it's the fear of the unknown. And I think that's a big thing nowadays. People want to plan and people get anxious and all of these stuff because they try to prepare themselves for things before it happens. And so that preparation feeds into that fear in some way, shape or form.
That's so interesting. And a lot of what you're talking about just makes me think those approaches all sound like the desire to control. Why do we feel we need to do that? And I think there is a definite atmosphere now. People are anxious about certain types of things going on.
Yeah.
Having things like choice, health, and unknown stuff really impact people on such a mass scale. It took levels that I think we know, unprecedented levels. And it was a common word that was used all the way through the pandemic. But honestly, to see that, you could read, people are now planning for futures. I watch a lot of kind of Instagram reels where people like, we left our life in the city. We just broke loose from it after COVID. We went through so much trauma. Like, people lost jobs, lost homes, lost family members. And like, the waiting to save up, stay at a job I can live later on became something that was actually not negotiable anymore. People were like, I will go and find a way to make the dream life that I really want and not sit in roles that society expects of me. But in saying that, people are also preparing for a tomorrow that that, like you just said, seems really unknown. We have so much political unrest, and it's not just even here. We've just had a change of government of recently, our grand election, our general elections, and we can see there are other elections happening in some other very kind of prominent superpowers around the world as well.
Yeah.
This very large scale sense of transition seems to be happening quickly. Lots of questions. People don't know what's happening because they've seen how life can change in an instant with COVID. We're like, what is the next crazy thing? And are we doing enough to prepare for it? And I think that's where I think my earlier comment about all of these things are based on, I need to control this because then it won't devastate me, it won't blindside me. Which is, I think, what's happening.
And I think COVID was a learning kind of journey for us all, because we never expected it. It was something of the unknown. There was talk, we were only going to stay inside for a couple of weeks or a month, and then it turned into 6 months to a year. And people are just like, oh my goodness. And even that, people have become so accustomed of being at home that they don't even really want to leave their house because there's fear of COVID in itself. So I think COVID shifted and kind of changed the nature and how we try to overcome fear, but also how we deal with it. It was just such a crazy time.
I think you were going further from that moment. Like, I've also encountered a lot of, because it was young people particularly, but others also experiencing like, I don't want to leave my home anymore. This has created a sense of people are struggling how to interact with people in person. Those that may have had anxieties before about social environments, like that just became, I think, compounded with the very like intense and elongated period of isolation, which what was kind of the part of the course with COVID. But also young people, that was super developmental. Is every single year when you're in secondary school, primary school, is so defining actually, and you're generally, the leaps and bounds that you're supposed to make between each year is so vast that when those 2 years were taken away from a generation of young people, especially those in the exam periods, like if you see some of that kind of age group now, even in the age like 20 to 22, that was crucial exam time then for them about 4 years ago. They struggle to that. They appear to be very young, underdeveloped in their social interaction skills. And people are like, well, now that the world became more fluent and accessible via social media, online, through my TV, I can just, no one needs to go to the cinema anymore. You can actually get the latest release on your television box today. You don't even have to go out anymore. That has built up, I think, less resilience, less kind of enthusiasm, and a lot of that comes from almost like, now we've become fearful, become so used to this is our world, and it's become smaller, insular, because we spent all this time at home. We're afraid to step out. Like, I can't do that anymore. What's out there for me? Will I be able to function as well? Amazing as to how that's kind of developed in a lot of people right now.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think when we look at fear in that context, we notice that a lot of people are going through periods of anxiety, depression. And I was listening to this talk, and it was talking about, it's not depression or anxiety per se, but it's your fear that's literally stopping you and putting you in that rut. So it's actually, depression and anxiety is only the fruit of that branch of fear.
Wow.
And I was just like, I never thought of it like that. Because if you think about it, if I think about from my own personal experiences, if I know I'm going up to the top of the mountain to jump off of it. My fear is going to capture me first, and then I'm going to get anxious, and then I'm going to question, and then I'm going to overthink and doubt myself. And then there's this whole process of all the other emotions that are attached to that fear, which either I overcome it and I, try and create a new and cultivate a new mindset around it, or I just don't do it and I run back in my box because my fear has crippled me to the point where I don't even think that's possible. And I think that's when we look at fear and, we think of mental health and, the different things. Fear is probably like the root cause of all of that. I'm not a psychologist or a scientist, so please don't take my word for it, people.
But these are really real experiences that I think what you're saying I've heard as well. Like, I don't think it's as uncommon at all. And I love that you spoke about it's the fear element. And some people, I think, for me, going through COVID, that was really interesting. I just got to a point where, like, I used to be super social, outgoing in terms of like really involved in community stuff. I had just lost all desire to engage with that again. Even now, I would say I still struggle. So when I attend like specific community gatherings, I find myself like, okay, I've clocked out and I'm ready to go. Or I'm just like, I don't think I want to be in this space anymore. And it's like a weird thing that will just happen. Like, I might be having a really good time, it's all fine, then all of a sudden it just kicks in like, I don't want to be here anymore, I actually can't. And that's got nothing to do with the lovely people around me. It's just interesting how that has left something in me, and I'm just like, where is this really coming from? And I think you're right in terms of we maybe need to assess, don't look at the symptoms per se, but what is the root cause? And a lot of these things are coming from fear spaces. I think even things like suspicion, for me, like always suspecting the worst is a fear thing, right? Expecting not the best or having a scarcity mindset is a fear thing, right? And I think we underestimate how much these things are really steering a sense of abundance that we could be experiencing in our life, right?
And I think that flows through probably every decision, every movement that we make. Like, it is all based on our experiences, how we interact with that, and how we allow it to direct our trajectory of life. Because if I had taken different steps in my life, I would have definitely ended up at a different destination to where I am now. And I think it's really important for us to assess and think and understand what's driving a particular behavior. If I know that going to the top of that mountain and I'm getting these fear elements or anxiety crippling emotions, what is driving that? What experiences did I have where heights is such a traumatic experience? And it's about assessing that. To be honest, I probably think it's because my dad threw me up in the air too many times when I was a kid, and I'm just like, no, I'm done. I don't like this anymore. But I think we need to assess where that comes from, and we need to understand. It's probably quite controversial to say it, and a lot of people might not like me saying this, but it's a safe space here. But I don't think anxiety and depression is always the answer. I think it goes beyond that. And people say, oh, I'm depressed. But there's a reason you're depressed. There is something that triggered you. There is a fear that has been instilled or you've experienced that have led you to that path of depression. And I'm not saying depression is not real. It is a very real thing.
But and our bodies manifest it in chemical and clinical 100%. Ways. Yeah.
So it's just like, where does that come from? And for me, I just think it all boils down to our fear of whatever it may be we're encountering.
That's so interesting. That's an interesting thought. And I think it causes you automatically to have a sense of reflection in terms of, when I get into a certain state, why am I behaving like this? And I think one of the things that I think one of the things that kicked in when I first started traveling after COVID with my husband, we went to Anguilla, your home, for our first actually big trip since we had got married, and we didn't even go on honeymoon or anything like that. So a whole year is kind of almost gone. We're now in the next year. This is early January. And I just remember overwhelming senses of almost paralyzing fear. I'm like, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do that. And also it was that my husband and I were still like figuring out traveling together. Like that's a whole other thing. He's like, he can walk really fast. One of his strides is about 5 of mine. and he's rushing ahead, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to leave me, or why is he like he's just moving really fast? Is he expecting me to keep up with him? And actually, like, I know that for me, when fear is happening, then anger kicks in, and it becomes super defensive, and I'm like, I'm furious because something about me or something that I feel that may be connected to my stability is under threat or under compromise in some shape or form. And I think there was like a personality assessment thing. You know, there's so many of them.
Yeah.
And one of them came up, and they said, "Oh, and this is a typical family joke discussion moment that we had in our home after a meal." And this is when they started to talk about these personality types, and they said, "Oh, guess Carla." And then my sister said, "I think you're this one." And then the minute they read them out, one of them was like, "It's always needing security." And they all were like, "Oh my gosh, yes." And I was like, what are you talking about? They're like, this is when that kicks in for you. If your sense of security can be anything. And we're not talking about financial, we're talking about your senses of, like, and I was just like, that makes so much sense now. That is a fear aspect, my security.
Yeah.
And that could be down to multiple things. Maybe there's trauma back there. I'm not a psychologist to go deeping into it. Or diving into it. But what I would say is, like, you're so right in terms of, if you were to really look at fear in its face, if those fears are coming from things that maybe I experienced as a young child, or things that happened that I didn't have control over, I'm a grown woman now. If I was to really look that fear in the face, would it have the same impact? But I think, like you said, there comes a point where you have to make a choice about whether you're going to allow it to paralyze you, or you're going to allow it to, like, actually just make a different decision. Yeah. It doesn't have to be so, like, dramatic as, oh, I'm Wonder Woman, like, you know, right now, I'm a superhero and a cape just comes out of nowhere. But what I'm saying is, like, we could just make a different decision. You can, like, I don't have to lose my hat right now.
But then let's flip the script with this, because I don't necessarily think that fear is always a bad thing either.
Interesting. Okay. I have never associated that word with anything positive.
Like, my brain is just ticking. I think fear also comes from being uncomfortable in a certain situation. And we know that in order for you to grow, to enable you to go to the next step and reach your goals, there is an element of fear. And there is something else, conflicting ideas, but there was something else I listened to, and it was just like, if you're not scared of it, that means it's not big enough.
They're not your dreams. If they don't scare you, they're not big enough. Yeah.
So it's just like, okay, how are we analyzing what fear is, but also how are we analyzing what that fear can do? Because if that fear is just going to continue to cripple you, then you know there is some deeper stuff that you need to work on and get a therapist. Always get a therapist. But then you need to understand, like, if I'm fearful in a certain situation because I know it's going to allow me to grow, and I'm scared of the unknown, I'm scared of, being uncomfortable, that's a good type of fear to sit within. I'm going to be very open and honest. Like, every time I have to speak to a crowd or to anyone, I literally get the worst nerves. I do. And
people spend so much time talking to people.
And people would think that I don't, but I actually get so nervous, and I'm just like, what if I mess up? What if I do this? Like, my brain, like, I literally get the shakes internally. And I'm just like, okay, this is uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to run and hide. But then it's because I know I'm doing something that's outside of my comfort zone. I'm talking about something outside of my comfort zone. So in that moment, I embrace fear. I let fear, understand. I try to communicate with it, shall I say, in a way that this is good. Like, I know my body's just like, saying no, but I know this is good for me. And I don't know how many of you watched the new Inside Out 2 movie, but I haven't watched it. I haven't watched it, but my sister told me. She was just like, you need to watch Evelkah, because it's literally so true in terms of all of your emotions working in harmony with one another, rather than one taking over and completely damaging or corrupting or paralyzing what you decide to do. Because it's great to be happy, but if that happy is not balanced with other things in order for, like, your discernment, it can also lead you to make trigger happy choices that probably won't actually, so it's all about balance. And she was talking about how anger had to be balanced with certain things, other emotions, in order for the person to actually work in harmony with one another, and things get done in the right way, and choices are a lot more clearer in terms of what you want to make. So I'm definitely gonna have to watch it, because
this sounds amazing. This is like
cool.
tools and preparation for life right there.
And my sister was just like, Evelkah, that is literally me. Like, I'm just like, okay, we need to do some work with you.
It's so interesting. I think I have a real aversion to the word fear, because I think, so there's always been an acronym in my family and community that they've said that fear is basically false evidence appearing real. And I think when I think fear, I only think of the debilitating, paralyzing one. Anything that kind of a decision made out of fear is never really, are you actually thinking clearly? Sometimes you actually close doors to good opportunities based on the fear element. What you described to me was nervousness. Is that quite the same thing? And because I get what you're saying is outside of the comfort zone is uneasy and uncertain. But I wonder if fear is still in a very different kind of
But I still think it's part of the branch of fear.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I would still think my nervousness comes from the fear of speaking in public and being ridiculed because I've said I would say something wrong or incorrect. Okay. So it's just like, it doesn't appear like anxiety, but it appear in nerves, and it appear in me feeling genuinely like I literally get a physical sensation of shakes.
Wow.
When I have to go and speak in person. So I don't think, I would say it's a branch off of fear rather than it's, the root cause. I would say it's definitely fear, because I think for me growing up, it was like people used to always say, Evelkah, you do this, Evelkah, you do that, because I studied, I did what I needed to do, I was well spoken. But then I remember even as a kid, I was just like, I don't want to do this. Like, I really don't want to do this. And people would be like, no, you're fine. And I literally would be trembling. I don't know if anyone can see, but I'm literally like shaking uncontrollably, because I was just like, this is something I don't want to do. And I think for me, because growing up, I was told to make sure you do this correctly, make sure you do that correctly. And I think I was obsessed with this perfection idea. So the fear of making a mistake would almost be crippling to me. And I think that's where that kind of stemmed from. But I do think it's a branch off of fear.
Interesting. Okay, I will agree to disagree.
What do you think?
It's interesting. I think my only associations, as I said, tend to be like, if fear is anywhere, like there's just no room for it. And I think because, if I'm very honest, a lot of decisions I think I've made, not even growing up, in my adult life, I could see now was more through suspicion rather than an exploration and curiosity. And suspicion is like, because you don't trust people. Therefore, if you don't trust people, it's the fear that you'll be taken advantage of, or you're going to make a bad decision, or I'm going to let people down, that fear of that. And so, like, if I look through every single time where that element that I understand about fear was in operation, it didn't really get me anywhere. I ended up not making decisions because of fear. I ended up standing very still for a long period of time because of fears. Like, if I do this, I'll disrupt the car and this will have impact on everybody else. Or if I do this, I'm going to really let down my parents. This will really like break their heart. Or if I do this, if I do that, this might impact X, Y, and Z. Or if I do this, people have an expectation of me to behave. And I think, like you, having being in an environment where like people expect you to, and I think particularly maybe because we're girls as well, I'm going to say that because these are lovely people, but I think if I was a boy and I'd had a lot more grace, I think doing whatever I wanted, and then there'll be like grace. But I had a lot of people telling me like, you need to be careful, actually. My daughters are watching you. So when you're told that from a young age, like, all of my decisions are filtered through that. And that's not freedom, really. And I think that's where, when I hear it, for me, I'm just like, I can accept nervousness. I can accept reverence also. When you said, like, if your dreams don't kind of scare you a little bit, or like feel overwhelming or can seem daunting, then they're not big enough. I can bind that, but I can never say yes to the fear thing. And I think only because of my personal experience and the road that has taken me around, like I have very little kind of tolerance to allow it in. And even now I still have to, if I have a certain adverse reaction about something, I've got big pushback, and I'm like, but why am I pushing back like that? Where's that coming from? Because it's not really me. And I can feel like when I'm doing it, something very physical is happening to my body. Like I can feel myself like a constriction in my chest, or I can feel myself as burning on the inside. And it's the need to defend something, because you feel something in this interaction is going to put you in a situation that you don't want to be, or it's going to put something off kilter that you feel is going to impact the sense of your sense of security or something. So that's probably why I'm a little bit on the passive side of no. But like, we might just be using different terminology, which I absolutely understand. But like for me, if you ask me about if this is fear, like I don't want to dance with that.
I think, you know, I do get what you're saying as well, because there is a hesitancy to play with fear. And we say that also in the context of taking risks. Fear and taking risks are almost on the same...
You're dancing in the same court.
Yeah, like it's in the same environment. So when people talk about I'm not going to take risks, it's because I'm not going to get involved in that because I'm scared what may happen. And what you was talking about is you didn't want to take the risk of having someone hurt you or having an interaction that wasn't going to
just have good outcomes.
So I think there is that element, and there is people that be like, you know, take risk, and I'm always like, taking risk is good, but take calculated risk. There's a difference between taking risk and actually considering what you're doing and considering, you know, all the details. I'm not saying that you have to know every single aspect, but don't just go in there blind, because I think that's where we end up lost, or that's where we, you know, go down the road of anxiety and depression, and it's not helpful.
We don't end up going anywhere. In that sense. What would you say in terms of, just to kind of round up this section of this, like, what has fear taught you? Like the debilitating kind. Now you're talking about fear almost as like, I can recognize it doesn't control me and I move forward. What shifted for that for you, and how did you, what have you learned through that process? Because you're clearly on the other side from the way that you talk about it now.
I'm on the other side.
Okay, we've further along on the other side.
I still dance with it, if I'm honest. Like, there are moments where I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to do it because it hurts, or I don't want to know the outcome. So I think for me, I test the waters. I dip my toe. Okay. And then I decide whether it's worth it or not. But I think for me, it's all about understanding, like, what experience can I gain through it? If I don't do it, what am I losing out on? Or if I do it, what am I gaining? And being able to decipher and assess how far I'm willing to go. Like you said at the start, I'm one of those people that just do it anyway. Like, and a good example of this is, I was traveling a couple of years back, and I've never really swam out in open waters.
Wow.
Without a life jacket. And so the person I was traveling with, we were all on this boat, and we were out in deep waters, and it was great. And I was just like, we seeing people jump off the boat and everyone out in the water, and I did have an envy. I did envy them. I was just like, oh, I wish that was me. And then the person I was with decided that they were going to go. So I stood there, and I literally was like, do I go in without a life jacket, or do I go in with? And I think it was my fear of, what if I drown? like, what if I drown? I'll look like an absolute fool, where everyone else is having the best time, and there's me.
I love that it was about everyone is gonna laugh that I drown. Never mind that I drown.
What? I was like, what impression will that look? And I'm not gonna lie, I was probably the only black girl. I was just like, I want people to think, oh, of course it's the black girl that drowned. But all jokes aside, I literally was like, I'm in an ahhing, and I'm just like, do I go with the life jacket? Do I not? Do I be brave? And I know I can swim. Like, I know. And it was just like, the fear in me was just like telling me, you can't swim. Like, what are you all about? And I decided, you know what? I'm just gonna try, because it doesn't hurt to try. And if I get burned, I can learn from that situation.
Yeah.
But if I don't, I can embrace the fact that I tried something new and I succeeded. And so your girl didn't go in with a life jacket. I was just like, we're gonna trust myself. And I think that's a big thing. Trusting yourself and your ability is very important in overcoming fear. And so I remember I didn't jump off the boat. Baby steps.
Down the ladder.
I went down the ladder. And I'm not going to lie to you, I hold on to the ladder for a good 5 minutes.
So they're like, are you okay, Evelkah?
I was just like, we'll just stay here for a bit. We'll get my bearings. I stayed there for a good 5 minutes. And then bit by bit, I started to like edge further away from the ladder. And eventually I let go and I just swam around the boat. And then I was great. And then 5 minutes later, they were just like, yeah, we're leaving now. And I'm just like, I just got in. But it was such a great experience. And for me, I was so proud because I was battling this idea that I didn't have the confidence to swim in open waters. And there am I doing exactly what I said I knew what I was capable of, but the fear was crippling me so much and telling me otherwise. I almost believed it. And I think for me, it was trusting in myself and my ability to know and understand what I'm capable of, and being able to step outside and not let fear control who I am or what I can do.
I feel we should end that amazing episode right now. The gospel according to Evelkah Powell, everybody. But this has been an amazing conversation. Like, make sure that you're subscribing, liking,
all of it.
All the connecting conversations with Cohesia Connect. And there'll be part 2 shortly to follow. Thank you so much.